Now everybody knows that torture in Russia exists. You won't find a person in Russia that will, neglect the fact that people are being beaten in police station, for example.
Dear friends, welcome to another edition of Forum 2000 Online Chat. Today I have a very special guest. Olga Alexandrovna Sadovskaya is joining us. Hello, Olga.
Hello.
I will briefly introduce Olga to you. She lives in Nizhny Novgorod and is a director of international programs of the Committee Against Torture. Olga is a law graduate of Nizhny Novgorod State University and Amsterdam University, specializing in international law. She has a special interest in the law and practice of the European Court of Human Rights and in the human rights institutions of the UN. Olga Sadovskaya has been a staff member of the Committee Against Torture since 2003. In 2005, she became the head of the committee's Department on International Protection. Since 2006, she has been deputy chair of the Committee Against Torture. Olga Sadovskaya is the co-author of the alternative report to the UN Committee Against Torture and author of several dozen articles on application of the law in cases of torture in Russia and on the law and practice of the European Court of Human Rights. Olga Sadovskaya is a trainer in the Huridok system and author of training seminars on standards of the European Court of Human Rights for lawyers, law enforcement officers, and prosecutorial officials. Welcome once again, Olga. It's great to have you here with us today.
Thanks.
Olga, I guess now that I've introduced you, I'm actually curious to ask you a little bit about the organization that you represent, the Committee Against Torture. Perhaps before we dive into more present-day situation in Russia, maybe you can just briefly introduce us what the organization does and what's your role specifically in the organization.
My organization actually was established 21 years ago in Russia, and it's obviously from the name of the organization that we deal with torture allegations. What we mainly do is we investigate torture allegations in Russia using our own methodology of independent public investigation that allows us to collect necessary and enough evidences in torture cases and makes us able to bring the perpetrators to justice on national level. And if we don't succeed on national level, we apply to European Court of Human Rights or UN bodies on behalf of the applicants, on behalf of torture victims, getting fair compensation for them, and sometimes criminal cases initiated against the perpetrators. So our main activity is the investigation of torture cases, and all other activities actually surround that core activity that we fulfill. And we also educate legal professionals. We do a lot of analytical work on the cases we work with, because we have several thousands of cases that we have litigated for the recent 20 years. We monitor prison conditions. We provide psychological assistance and treatment for the torture victims. We have charity fund that enables people to donate and to support torture victims in Russia, and that's all the activities we mainly have. And all of them are concentrated around the main thing we do is the investigation.
That's really remarkable. You must have your hands full these days, especially as we are watching protests unfold in Russia, across Russia, not just in the capital and big cities, but also across Russia, in response to Navalny's arrest and now his imprisonment. What's the situation now? Are you getting a lot of reports of torture? Because we're certainly seeing from the news that there are certainly many cases of torture.
Well, I would say there are certainly many cases of illegal arrest, but I wouldn't say at that point that there is a lot of cases of torture. There are a lot of incidents that we see from the video about, random and absolutely illegal use of police force. But it's a big question how many people of those who were subjected to this kind of treatment will go and ask for the assistance. Human rights organizations, lawyers, some private practicing legal professionals, and others. I guess not many of them. But we started to receive torture cases, and majority of the cases we are dealing with now is the cases from the 23rd of January, because actually majority of those people who were severely beaten are either in the hospitals and couldn't come to apply for the assistance, or have got 10 or 15 days of their arrest and they're not released yet. So it's again too early to speak about how many people have applied for the legal assistance after the events of 31st of the January and 2nd of February, because many of them are still under arrest. And many of them who were severely beaten during the arrest and detention, as we saw from the videos. In the majority of the cases, it means that they were delivered to the police stations and then got arrested for several days. So it means they're not released and they couldn't apply and they couldn't come to human rights defenders yet. We hope and believe that they will come, but of course, our resources, human resources, as any human rights organization in Russia, is very limited, and we won't be able, of course, to take all the cases. And we will be, and I'm sure that's the same story about our colleagues. And I know that Over the Info is experiencing lack of lawyers that could go to the courts, because there is a huge number of cases and they don't have enough lawyers who could assist those people who were arrested in courts. This is the lack of the resources. It's obvious that the number of torture allegations will be much more higher than the number of cases that the human rights organizations could take.
Of course, and the platform that you've mentioned, the Over the Info, if I'm correct, they've been very crucial in tracking the numbers, especially the night of the sentence. They kept updating their website just for the audience to know who they are and what they do. Really a great resource if you're looking into the specific issue. Olga, I guess my following question, the most obvious question, is in the cases where the victims do report the torture and you collect the evidence and there is enough evidence that you can present in domestic courts on a national level. What are, first of all, I guess the first part of that question is, what are the chances of actually getting to the bottom of it in domestic courts? And what happens even once they leave and you take the case to the European Court of Human Rights? What are the chances of winning the case or actually having victim seek justice to what has been committed against that person?
It really depends on the type of the case. If we speak about the cases coming from the protest actions, there is absolutely no chances that you succeed with the case on national level. As we see from the protest of 2019, and it was the first situation when we came across for all the years we are working with the torture allegations, is that we even couldn't lodge a complaint about torture within the investigational committee if the torture happened within protest action. And that's a very serious separate problem. We try to challenge that issue, but I'm sure, and I won't be mistaken if I say that it is the experience of other human rights organizations, that in case when torture happened as a pressure towards protesters and during the protest movements, there is no chance that the criminal case will be initiated, and there is no chance that it will be transferred to the court. So here you don't have. There are no expectations on national legislative system and on national court system when it comes to protest cases. But when it comes to other cases, well, it's a little bit, not correct to say that it's, just ordinary torture cases, because torture is not an ordinary thing. But the cases that are more widespread, when it doesn't come to protest actions, for example, beating in police when the police officer is trying to convince a person to deliver self-confession or something like this, or just some incidental arrest by police provoked by the behavior of a person or some other issues. There are chances. I would say it's 50-50, like in 50% of the cases, if you have strong support and strong legal position from the organization, the victim of torture has hope and has grounds to believe that in 40 or 50% of the cases, he or she could succeed on national level and got national verdict against the perpetrators. The amount of the compensation would still be low and lower than the standards of European Court of Human Rights, but the feeling of justice when your perpetrators are punished is very important as well. And less than half of the cases go to the court and end up with verdicts, but it's not much differ from half and half. But in those part of the cases when we don't succeed on national level, of course, we go to European Court of Human Rights, and that is much more predictable process.
Sure. And what about the actual punishment in addition to obviously financial compensation? What happens to, for instance, police officers who engage in this kind of action? Do they get fired, or do they just get a temporary notice to leave and then they come back? I mean, what kind of system exists?
If the case is transferred to the court, all of them get fired. So it's logical consequence when the case is transferred to the court, and they receive absolutely different types of punishment. Of course, it's never a fine, but it can be serious punishment like 5 or 6 years imprisonment. Or it could be a conditional sentence, like you got 4 years of conditional sentence. It means that you don't go to prison. It means that you stay at home and you should behave in accordance with the law, and the Federal Penitentiary Service checks how you do. If you violate the requirements of the conditional punishment, you go to jail. But it never happened in our cases. So conditional punishment is a conditional punishment. The person is still free, but usually in 90% of the cases, he's fired from police and has no right to continue working in police even after the punishment is served.
Mm-hmm. All right, that's good. That's good to know. And I guess my final question, I guess, to sum it up, I mean, you've been working in this field for a long time, and you work for an organization that's been around for, you said, 20-something years. How would you, in general, describe the situation with regard to torture allegations, impunity or punishment, or this sense of justice? How are we seeing any progress in this regard, or is it the same situation, or what is it like at the moment?
Well, actually, we as the people working with the issue, we do see the progress. Of course, if you look at the mass media in Russia, you don't see anything good about torture, because you read numerous articles about tortures and abductions and lack of justice, and the protesters are beaten, and people in CISO, in pretrial detention centers, are dying, and everything like this. But believe me, it's a good sign that you're able to get information about what is happening in the state. Because when we started to work on the issue 20 years ago, it was absolutely invisible type of crime. There were no criminal cases. There were no articles in newspapers. There were no journalist investigations. There were no court verdicts against the perpetrations. There were nothing on TV, and internet was 20 years ago a little bit different that we have now. But in independent media, and I'm not speaking about the state-owned media, but even in independent media, there were no descriptions of torture cases. There were no information about torture cases. So it was so invisible thing that mainly people knew that somewhere in police people are beaten up. But in general, there was no understanding that torture exists in the country, and it existed. And I think that the first and the main step when you deal with the problem is to talk about the problem, to show that the problem exists, and to illustrate how the reality looks like. And for those years, it was a very serious step made forward, because now everybody knows that torture in Russia exists. You won't find a person in Russia that will, neglect the fact that people are being beaten in police station, for example. They could argue maybe they have beaten for cause or something like this, but still, it's widely known that it exists. You won't find a week in a year when there are no articles on news or publications or videos about tortures in Russia. And this amount of information about the problem is a very important step towards
Exposing.
towards exposing the problem. That's a very important thing. And the number of verdicts against the perpetrators is growing as well, because in 2000 there were no verdicts against the perpetrators. And torture problem contains of many different problems. For example, we mainly work with torture in police station, but we had a long and awful history of tortures in army. And we couldn't say that this problem is absolutely solved. But the number of torture cases in army seriously decreased from the period of 90s. And this is due to the efforts of human rights organizations that usually called soldiers' mothers, that were directly working with the tortures and ill treatment in army. So I wouldn't say that everything is so bad and everything is going to become worse and worse and worse. No. In some parts of life, we definitely see serious deterioration. But in some parts of the life, we see the progress. But sometimes the progress doesn't look like you want it to look like, just immediately the problem is solved. No, but this is the way towards.
And that's, I guess, it's a really a good way to sum it all up, because in many ways, when we think of not just torture but any kind of human right violation, the biggest issue is that, well, people don't know about it. But now the more exposure there is in the media and the more people read about it and the more awareness there is about it, there's probably also an understanding that forms within people's opinions that, well, no, like there are issues, that there is torture, and that there are organizations, most importantly, working on this and providing assistance. Olga, thank you so much for joining this conversation. Thank you for giving us this rather bleak, but also with some signs of positive developments of the state of torture in Russia. It's been great talking to you, and I am wishing good luck and patience in your work. And I'm sure there's going to be more cases piling up on your desk in the following weeks and months. And thank you once again for being with us.
Thank you. Thanks for calling.